Testing audio. Testing audio.
You're still on your test.
Okay,
You're
folks.
still kind of weak.
Let's bring it back to our seats, please. Thanks, everyone. While everyone's getting seated, I do think at least one additional person arrived while we were in the midst of conversation. Hello, Hillary. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us who you are representing, where you're from, and then we also had a fun question of where's your favorite place in Oregon? Not to put you on the spot.
Thank you, Sarah. I am Hillary Foote, and I am a farm and forest land use specialist for the Department of Land Conservation and Development, or DLCD. And DLCD is a sister agency to ODFW, and we primarily work with local jurisdictions, cities and counties, on a variety of land use issues that serve in this forum, how we to develop, use, or conserve our landscapes. So I focus on the aspects of the program that protect farmland and timberland through the use of zoning. So zoning that is restrictive and limits the types of development and partitioning actually in those areas. So something that we've actually been focusing quite a lot on in the past year are highlighting the co-benefits that preservation of working lands has also for habitat. So we engaged in a partnership with the DFW staff this summer to do some mapping around where those authorities for our agency and for ODFW overlap, and that was very interesting. So I'm very excited for the conversation today, and just to hear additional feedback from a different set of stakeholders that I usually work with on the topic of co-benefits. Thank you very much for having me here.
And your favorite Oregon is?
My favorite Oregon, I guess, is my house.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, I live in Northern Tillamook County. My husband and I operate a farm. We raise beef cattle and pastured pork, and we have about 1.5 miles frontage along the Neelam River.
Did anybody else roll in at the table who wasn't here for the intros? I think we might be okay there. Oh, yes. So hopefully everyone has pulled their chair back to the table. Feel free, and we'll invite all of our online attendees. You feel free to turn your cameras back on. Quick little sound check. How are we doing? How are we doing online? Can you hear us?
Yeah, it's not too bad.
It's okay. It gets a little garbly sometimes, but yeah.
Are you following along closely? Okay. Staff are in the back here diligently trying to fix the audio situation. So thanks for hanging in there. All right, in this block, we are focused on a conversation, adaptation, and around barriers. Curious to know how you're adapting to the stress of higher temperatures, prolonged drought, invasive species. We heard a little bit about that in the first round. For our coastal friends, there's issues like sea level rise, more intense wildfire, we're all probably dealing with. And then we would like to talk about barriers. Where are there and where are the barriers to your ability to adapt? onward plans. And again, what are some examples of where state agency programs have helped you or know to adapt? So I will just open this up. You know, we're all facing threats. Fish and wildlife are facing these threats. Our landowners are facing these threats. Our partners are really actively trying to address them. So this is open to the room. If anybody would like to take a stab at the first one, which is how are you adapting to the threats? Got it. Wait, is the name 10?
Thank you. Mr. O'Keefe reminded me that that's how the rules.
About that. Remember when all you
Well, I guess in my first comment earlier, I didn't mean to suck the wind out of the room. That's really the ugly side of the climate. This part is actually the fun side. Usually I like to do presentations and stuff. I say if you're expecting to hear the doom and gloom of the climate, the wrong presentation. This is about the positive side of the climate. So this is, like I said, this is the fun stuff. What we're doing to address the or how we're adapting. I think context is important in this, and those of you that don't know, there was a real storied collaboration in very recent history that ultimately was called Climate Basin Reduction Agreement, the Climate Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement. And it was pretty incredible across the West, the water world anyway, where communities, stakeholders that normally would not sit at a table together, let alone have a meal together, came together and really put some special together. Like, how are we going to move forward as a basin and resolve these water issues and stop sending the power out to each other? Sadly, Congress failed to pass that agreement. And for a long period of time, there was what I like to call a KVRA hangover, and some may still be experiencing that, me included at times. However, from my perspective, that doesn't mean we should stop. There's a lot of goodwill, a lot of good stuff that came out of that, and KHSA survived, although it was amended. But I'm sure everybody in this room has read or seen video footage now of the salmon coming back up Klamath River because 4 dams just came out this year. That is the result of parents relative to the KHSA amongst many of the stakeholders. The sad thing, and I firmly believe this in my heart of hearts, that would never have happened without agriculture sitting at the table and supporting it originally. The real problem there, though, is that all the bargain for benefits that agriculture negotiated for have not come to light. And so we're stuck here now trying to figure out how to move forward. And there's a lot of good work in that regard from agriculture, who has now reached out to those stakeholders and said, let's start working together. What do we need to do? I think Commissioner Hatfield Hyde's neighborhood above Upper Klamath Lake is doing that. I'm going to speak relative to what we're working on. A couple of years ago, we started reaching out to local tribes and saying, what do we do? We're in a very fortunate position where geographically my district is located between the Klamath River and Upper Klamath National Wildlife Refuge, which the entire thing used to be called Upper Klamath Lake. Reclamation came in and drained it. We farm it. But I mentioned earlier, the refuge is going dry. When you stand there and you look at mud flats and cracks that you can't see the bottom of, your brain kind of shifts a little bit and how you think about stuff. And you know, I don't know if you guys have read the book Silent Spring. You guys read that? Rachel, forgive me. Thank you. Anyway, you're standing there looking at a dry refuge, and the silence really is deafening when you can't hear the birds. So my brain started shifting. I called up the refuge manager and I said, look, we got an opportunity here. That refuge only gets water from our canal, runs through our, we're pretty unique in the sense that we own our canal. Bureau of Reclamation owns much of the infrastructure in the project. We actually own our infrastructure. So I said, what if we were to open this canal back up? Let's just brainstorm a little bit. And it up to fish. We open the refuge back up to the lake, and we create a lake again. So that idea kind of took hold. And as a result, we've got the Yurok tribe in California, Modoc Nation, the home. There's a horrible story there. But they are coming home, which is a good story. Climate tribes are supportive. We've got many other stakeholders, obviously, including wildlife. Our neighbors to the northwest, that's on the river as well. And we're starting to sit around a table like this, much smaller, I'm that, but and start to come with putting this concept on paper, if you will. So some money to start figuring out the feasibility of something like that. And it's pretty exciting. I really wanted to point you all to a website today. Unfortunately, it's not quite ready, but it will be very soon. But it's kind of kind of rolling over after a horrible night on the town, feeling like crud. And you get up and you take a breath of fresh air, and you go and talk to your neighbors and say, "Let's move forward. Let's take a step forward." So I always like think of the buffalo, and they say that buffalo, when there's a storm coming, they run through the storm, run to the storm, instead of running away. I think there's a couple of reasons. Obviously, you don't have to live through the storm, but I think they end up being tougher. And so agriculture just really got beat up in a storm. And so there is another storm on the horizon, and if we don't run headfirst into it, then we're going to get beat up pretty hard again, I think. So that's really the approach I'm taking. That's how we're adapting, is we're running headfirst into the storm with partners that wouldn't typically be partners for us. We're taking an ecosystem approach, so we're not just looking at a single species. We're not just looking at a single bird, and we're not just looking at agriculture. We're looking at how we can live collaboratively with our refuge, with our species, still be able to put food on our producers' tables as well. So it's pretty exciting stuff. So that's the word adapting, and I didn't need to take long explaining that.
Were you going to tell us what the website was? Kind of a teaser.
I don't even know the name of it. I see. I'm like, is this thing ready to go? And it's not ready, so I'm sorry. It's a good thing. You'll have to Google it. Google it.
Maybe it'll be ready when we send the notes out. We can include that. You bet.
This question of, how are we adapting to growing climate-driven threats of higher temperatures, prolonged drought, invasive species, more intense wildfire, and sea level rise? I think on rangelands and ranch lands, we're to adapt exactly like all the other lands, which is it becomes more and more important that we create that healthy sponge, both in our uplands and down in our riparian bottoms, because there's, based on where you are in Oregon, there's so many different things that have happened, like Scott just mentioning the reclamation that happened in the Klamath Project, to bring resources to healing some of those damaged systems. But that doesn't mean we can't continue to be in agriculture there. So all of those systems that need our help, John was mentioning, the juniper removal, creating, for lack of a better term, making sure that sponge is in place so we're holding water, continental storage of water longer on the land. Full of the invasive species that are coming in that also feed our wildfire cycles. Basically, we're probably doing all of the things that BFW is doing on its own lands in Oregon. We're having to do that, and doing that. If we do not have partnerships, we cannot do as much of that as we would like to, because we have the resources, the industries that we are part of, pay the bill, right? So we need partners to really keep accelerating that. That's my thought, but maybe I'll get these other guys going. They have thoughts on this.
Yeah,
Bruce.
thanks. So I'm going to speak where my other hat of the Oregon Desert interest. Listening to Scott, I heard some things that ring a bell with me. Different partners, different scale. Looking at more ecosystem level with the Crabtree branch, which I mentioned, which that is really big between our ownership of the grazing leases. We support almost 20% of Oregon seagrass population. This is landscape scale management, and we have neighbors that are very much involved in this as well. But when the land trust came in and bought the ranch, the grazing had been leased out to an operator from another part of the state, and been operated pretty much the same way for a long time. Land trust doesn't own cows. We're leasing out grazing rights, we're leasing them out to neighbors, and between our land leases and our feed title ownership, we are giving them some opportunities to do things different on their own properties. So we have a number of neighbors out there that are now getting the opportunity to rest, have some recovery on some places that they've always wanted to do. As John was saying, a lot of these things you can't do without an operating budget. You got to break out of that box. And by having a new player there that, we don't have a mortgage because we have a very good fundraiser in our executive director. And we have a lot more flexibility. We don't have to be making profit. And we have some space there that we can share with our neighbors. And on a more of the landscape level, start to think about how can we do things differently. Change some of the timing and distribution of grazing on the federal lands out there, opening up some of our feed title to give people, our neighbors, opportunity to rest some of theirs. It's just a different way of doing things, and it's an experiment. I'd say we're early on in this. The other thing that really helps when we bought the ranch, the land for the ranch was its tail end 10 years of terrible drought, really beat up. And of course, good water here, and immediately it just looks fabulous. And it'd be nice to think that was the land trust, but it is a boom bust system out there. Gary Marshall used to say, 10 inches of 12 inches annual precip, 10 is a disaster, and 14 is a catastrophe. It's just having a little bit more slack in the system there gives people quite a few opportunities to do things differently.
Thanks. It's a great example for adaptation. Mark Hudson, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we deal with working landowners all over the state of Oregon, all of whom are dealing with, depending on geography and conditions, different versions of these problems. The thing that we notice pretty broadly is that for the most part, the landowners are older. Average age is about 62 years of age, so they're right there at the retirement deadline. And if you took them out of the producer spectrum and put them in, let's say, the white collar role, really mostly in a pretty poor position for retirement, right? So a lot of them have inadequate retirement savings. They have large infrastructure backlogs on their business, and then so kind of coming forth straight with the question of how are you going to adapt to climate conditions, without ready answers for bringing significant capital to them, it's pretty hard to push that argument. The reality is that at their stage of life and in their stage of business, without significant capital, they're going to see that as a next generation problem. And that next generation isn't going to necessarily be more financially secure than them. A lot of them are younger rancher producers where the ability to gain capital is really hard. And so, at Oregon Ag Trust, we have looked at conservation easements, yes, in their traditional format, as preserving land, but in actual fact is a liquidity tool. As a liquidity tool to both inject capital into existing producers, but also bring down the cost of acquisition to next generation producers. And when we look at that in the wildlife and watersheds health and natural resource health context, by creating that financial security, what I see is a whole lot more latitude for those producers to tackle the issues that we're talking about right now. because doing cost share programs and other things like that are great, but I think, they kind of limp the issues along a lot of the time, and without finding ways to kind of body tackle both the business side perspective and the natural resource perspective with significant capital, it's going to be pretty hard for us to see kind of a holistic vision of ag and wildlife resiliency stand side by side. And so that's kind of why we've taken the approach that we do. And we are already hearing and seeing benefits from producers about how they do feel like they are freer to take part in this kind of adaptive management facing these significant issues on their land.
Great, thank you. Really interesting. Seriously taking notes. This is super insightful. I'll just back to the room here. Any further thoughts on that or follow-on questions that anyone might have to what they've heard so far? Josh, please.
So I'm just thinking, in terms of adaptation and how we may work as agencies to try to adapt, and thinking of examples that we went through the last couple of years, right? So I think wildfire was mentioned, right? And so for the part of work that I do at the Department of Forestry involves post-fire recovery, right? It's the aftermath of fire. Most of it's focused on if there are trees to harvest, to take those trees, but also then the reforestation of that, right? We want those forests to remain for us. So that depending on where that occurs in Oregon, that is a different problem in each location that it occurs. But I think you'll hear a lot of times, I've heard it probably over the last 10 years, I've heard it multiple times that the last fire season was a historic fire season, and they keep getting bigger. And so a couple folks just internal to the agency started to adapt to that, right? Like as many would imagine, right? Like post-fire recovery was not a traditional part of our work at the agency. So whenever that happened, that was another piece of work. Things like getting the right tree back in the right place. With a black fire, regular fire regime on the landscape, right? You may have trees in the wrong place on the landscape. Things like that. So some adaptation just in process that's been occurring in the background is that one of our districts that have recently of a couple fire seasons created a partnership with to be a response team following that recovery to do a rapid assessment for the landscape. So for this fire season, that was already in place. And happened to be from a different district than the one in Monday that was the epicenter of fire. So that was a really useful resource to have to at least collect the data that we needed to begin to work with NRCS and other folks to have assistance for those. So just an example. And I thought I'd touch on the barrier there as well. In that statement is resources, both folks on the ground to collect that information, and also the technical and financial assistance that follows that has always been a barrier to how quickly and how much ground you can cover.
Go ahead. I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. That last session was really interesting and reflecting on some of the stressors, right, that operators, producers were bringing up, and something that I've thought about a lot recently. As a habitat, conservation practitioner, biologist by training, our focus, our North Star is on the resource, right? It's on wildlife, it's on the habitat. And so habitat conservation, looking at some of the issues, the things that operators lose sleep over, is pretty far down the list. Listening to the last session, I wrote down, that labor expenses and cost of materials and equipment, regulatory policies, and those are real burdens that folks are thinking about. And so when we bring conservation opportunities to them, it's kind of a no surprise that it can be challenging at times to engage landowners in doing restoration or protection or management projects. So what I've learned and my approach has been in trying to connect habitat programs projects in a way that also helps producers and landowners address some of these issues. And to be honest, a lot of our programs and the tools that we have are not adapted for that, right? That really isn't their purpose. But when we can address some of those operational limitations and issues that the landowners have, we find that those programs are a lot more successful. And I think that's an approach that a lot more of the conservation community is starting to take advantage of, whether it's the conservation easements that Mark mentioned, but also some of the more holistic programs like the Focus Investment Partnership Program and RSVP. So I used to take for granted the kind of founding principles of one of the collaboratives that I'm a part of, where we're addressing not just the ecological but also the social and economic, and you can't address these big natural resource issues without also taking care of the social and economic issues, or you're just not going to get very far.
Thank you. Heather, I think you had your hand up, and then Peter. Come on.
Piggybacking from Josh as well. So with NRTS, we in the last fiscal year, we put $30 million through the Inflation Reduction Act to address climate change. And again, that's just one small piece to it. But a lot of the work that Mr. Contreras had mentioned is through the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And we have really worked in partnership with many organizations such as ODF recently on like our fuels reduction and just in our general farm bill funds throughout the state addressing fuel reduction. And not just on the first street, but even on the South Coast with course addressing that as well. So there's many places around the state we've been working in conjunction with that to address wildfire issues. But I think one thing that has traditionally been here since time immemorial in prescribed burning, that's something we've been trying to get back on the ground and working with our partners on, is it's a tool that we have known for a while, that the tribes have used, that we're really trying to get back to. And there are some challenges with that. So we have a really good RCPP with ODF to see if we can get more fire on the ground, and looking forward to see where that lies. That's just the work in collaboration with that. And then going back to some of the wildfires, is just adaptation of trees as well, where we've seen after wildfires, the planting of trees from landowners has been almost 90% mortality that we had seen through farm service agents and NRCS. So our foresters and our state office and our tech center are looking at how do we address changing species as well for that adaptation.
Yeah, I just have a not fully thought that's been percolating for me. It's sort of a theme of around adaptation. It's that thing you mentioned earlier, sort of single species management, and I think it's this idea of resilience. And if the goal is resilience, we have like really multifaceted problems and systems that are very rarely multifaceted in how they approach problem solving, particularly within agencies. So you have, if Heather's agency does a NEPA, BR can't recognize your agency's NEPA, right? Or I had a chance to meet with PUC a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about their resilience plan, and I asked how they had been in communication with WF and W about your resilience work and goals. That they hadn't talked to you, and it's not an indictment of them. It's just an observation of how the system is set up. And I think more the state agencies can be thinking about solutions that are multifaceted or ways of approaching their work that are less siloed. And I think you get to StageCon, the examples we're highlighting where there's solutions that work, and where folks work across those sectors and thought about resilience in a different way. Scott, I think work in your district where you're sort of, we're working with you on canal covered solar, making a huge investment to update your system, but you're also thinking about, hey, how do I keep ag in production, but also think about renewables and reducing evaporation, etc. But it's outside the box. That's not happening at a landscape scale. It's an exception of anomaly rather than norm.
But we'll go around here. So I see Nathan and then Kristen.
Some of the things to adapt is largely not necessarily to address climate change specifically, but it's just to sustainable and continue farming. Sure, Eddie Hatfield had mentioned, absorbing, sponging up the moisture. That's one of the things we do with our reduced tillage and nearly no-till. We're trying to leave the soil resilient so it can absorb the moisture. We're using technology. All these big ag companies are coming up with great things that help farmers be more efficient. We take large fields now and break them down into as small as you want, little parcels that the tractor can then send the prescription for managing different products to the cloud, and the tractor applies the products best fit the soil productivity, whether that's fertilizer or seed. So we're doing a lot of things. Those things, some of them are helped with NRCS funds. We have things like insurance that help us when we do get disasters. So we appreciate NRCS in that regard. So I'll keep.
This might be sort of an expansion on what Peter was talking about. But I think where I see the solutions working best around the state are where we make the problems bigger. Early in my career, doing aquatic restoration, everything was about, passage through the channel, working on restoration for your riparian and aquatic area. And this is the entire opportunity to create those collaborative win-win solutions that are addressing the multitude of issues across the landscape, re-wetting the sponge, so to speak, around that particular stream, is creating more forage on the landscape, more opportunity than they're cutting of hay, and at the same time making sure that stream is flowing late into the season so they can get where they need to get at that time of year. And so by really thinking about these systems much more integrated and collectively thinking about lateral connectivity, not just longitudinal connectivity, we can create areas that are resilient to wildfire, which were some of the few highlights we saw, for example, in the catastrophic Boot Lake fire, where to persist. We're left in the little areas where we had really functional beaver ponds that had created an oasis in the midst of that to preserve those genetics. So I just am a big advocate for thinking about how we can make bigger in a sense, because that allows you to bring so many more tools to the toolbox to solve problems for multiple people, multiple species at the same time.
We are giving space here from our friends online. Any of our virtual attendees have anything on their mind they'd like to share in this section related to how you're adapting or any of the barriers you'd like to talk about?
This is Jim Wood. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Hello. Well, adapting, and this echoes some of what was said before. I mean, we've been, trying to work on doing some natural recharge projects, which we met a lot of resistance from the below the Prineville Reservoir and the irrigation districts, but then we started getting OSU Cascades, the hydrology department involved, but it has to do with modalities of irrigation. Some of it's going to be really quite startling to some people that maybe switching to low pressure, low volume sprinkling is maybe not the best way to go within the floodplain. I refer you to the research that Dr. Herzog is been putting out. And then just trying to increase the sinuosity of the river. The river was channelized by the Corps of Engineers in '64, straighten it out, and just, so it was just a big flush of water, but trying to reconnect the floodplain. So we have a prolonged period of more water within the soil, slowly being released to the river. The soil works essentially as a sponge. Think of that kitchen sponge. It's saturated. Leave it on the counter. It seeps out. So you end up with essentially more forage, but then you also end up with more water later in the river, cooler temperatures, and some degree of filtration. And there's actually quite a bit of work that's now coming out that a bunch of us on the Upper Crooked River sponsored, and we had one real major ranch that sponsored it. Would be Charles McGrath, but anyway, and he needs to be recognized. But and the recharge, if you look, there's a Ordnance Gravel's recharge project was kind of our model. It's up in the Umatilla. It started in the 1970s, but for those that are interested, look into it or reach out to me. We can talk more. So that's, invasive species issues, Medusa head, scary, and it's spreading like, the proverbial wildfire. We just treated 320 acres. It cost almost $40,000 to do. Could not have done it without grant money. Half of that grant money came from the Access and Habitat Open Fields program we've been doing with ODF and W. Thank you so very much. And some of the other monies came from, I call it blood money. It's mitigation money from the solar developments that's destroying critical winter range for mule deer and pronghorn. But I did take it. But so that's one way or two ways that we're kind of trying to adapt. And then participating in things like this, and then, this working group, and then going home and talking to other people, trying to get neighbors on board, and encouraging you all, and especially the agency people, to do more workshops like this. That's that's the only thing I've been able to come up with some degree of success. And a lot of it is really long term. In fact, it may not even, see the results in my lifetime. But anyway.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point. One of the questions that Mary always asks is, how do we know when we're making progress? And it's really hard because it's investments in really long-term things.
And you're absolutely correct. And this is something I was founding member of the Watershed Council in our area, and we used to dole out a lot of money for projects. But we had, the funny thing was, hey, we need to have monitoring before, during, and then as a former biologist, and then even a postdoc veterinarian, a reformed academic, whatever. Monitoring is really, really important, and putting together funding for monitoring. Monitoring is not cheap. And any of these projects that we do, we need to build that component in to that, or the funding for it, and the modalities need to be outlined.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
I asked you all about barriers, and you went right to solutions, which I think is amazing and shows how everyone is just so ready to be really actionable and active on this front for land conservation and adaptation. Before we go, so it's gonna tee us up really well for the next block. But before we go on break, which we're going to do in just a couple of minutes, the forest friends here, I've had some conversations with you all where I've asked this question of how are you adapting. So I'd love to hear from Gordon and Chris as well, if you want to speak to the industrial side, just a little bit from the forest perspective. What are some of the adaptation actions you all are taking?
Well, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to talk about barriers. One one of the things that there's a disturbing trend in forest regulation in Oregon, and it's like two buckets. We have one that has the economic side, and we have one that has the conservation, environmental side. And it seems that increasingly more and more, if you take something from one bucket, it's got to come out of the other one, or vice versa. Win-win solutions are pretty hard to come by these days. For very many years, a landowner and their Department of Forestry stewardship forester could develop alternate plans that were site-specific that allowed you to protect and enhance habitat at the same time that you were performing a timber harvest. It's gone. We've gone into an environment where we have one size fits all, and that's just the way that it is. That does not allow you to have an environment where collaboration for creative prescriptions is allowed. That's a sad thing. Another example, in Lane County this last winter, we had a very severe ice storm that at certain elevations, we saw tens of thousands of acres of forest devastated by the weight of ice. For example, on one of our forested properties, we have an area alongside a small fish stream, and that area was just devastated. We had trees tangled, broken, just a terrible mess. Under former regulations, which were still right after the year, that opportunity was still available for the stewardship forester and I to go out and create a plan that allowed us to clean up and restore that area. And at the same time, we were able to choose trees and alternatives that would give us shade and protect the fish habitat as well. Under the new rules of the PFA, which are going to take place very soon, if that happens this winter, I won't be able to do that again. And I think that's a sad thing. I don't think that having a mess lot is a good condition for forest resilience, for forest health, for the safety of our neighbors. This is an area that there are houses within a quarter of a mile, and we will have had this big strip of dead and down timber. These public policy implications flow to the landowner eventually, and we're in a position where we're held accountable for that. And instead of us having opportunities where we can win wins, now we're stuck with one size fits all. Somebody wins and somebody loses, and that's just a real shame. Thank you.
Yeah. So how are we adapting? There are discrete examples like planting more redwood, on the southern coast, because they're more drought adapted. And there are definitely forest landscape specific adaptations that our companies and foresters are taking that are specific to those specific locations. But it generally all comes down to investment. I mean, we're investing more in research. We're allowing access onto our lands by researchers studying, the impacts of fire on the landscape and studying impacts to trout, for example, in the Eagle Creek study. Investing in research on genetic diversity in things, and so there are a number of ways in which we're investing, but it's hard
it's hard to talk about this without talking about some of the barriers. And this touches a little bit on what Gordon was just sharing. An invitation is much more appealing than an edict. And we get a lot of people coming at us with a lot of edicts, and it's really hard to feel cooperative in the public policy making arena when folks are coming at you. At the forester level, I mean, there's a lot of in doing good stuff. I'm convinced that if we didn't have a great college of forestry here in this state, perhaps all of the foresters that work for member companies would be wildlife biologists instead, because people go into forestry because they love being in the outdoors, working in natural environments, studying ecosystems, working with ecosystems and ecosystem management. So they're really closely, there's a close kinship between foresters and wildlife biologists. And we do projects and we do research and we fund that type of research because we want to. There is a business imperative involved as well, long-term sustainability of our business, but it's ingrained in the stewardship ethic of our member companies and the foresters for them. And at the end of the day, we just want to do good things for the landscape and for the ecosystem. So that's a little bit about the barriers, and some of them are just human relations, and we all understand what it feels like to be told you have to do something versus being asked to collaborate on some things.
I've got a quick actionable comment about barriers. Lake County, like a lot of the West, it's a 78% federal land. If you're going to work on a landscape scale, you've got to deal with the federal issues. One of the barriers is the need to process National Environmental Policy Act. If there happens to be one in here, doesn't know the acronym. This might be one of the more actionable things today. Have your agency, have your local biologists engage in these processes, make comment in support of working lands. The comments are often the environmental community puts out the cows off, the rancher puts in comments, support livestock, thoughtful comments about the value of grazing in that application will move that decision toward the direction of working lands and getting this stuff done. So
Thank you, John. I'm quickly learning that if you want to get the last word in before on break, John's shy. So I think that's a good spot for us to take another 10 minutes. Or you know what? Let's need time to socialize. Okay. Let's convene back at 4.
be in the press.
You know that that's all right. Forgot to turn one on. Yeah. Okay. One for making it back, and we are on to our third and final block of questions and conversation. How are our folks online with us? Cool, thank you. Okay, so we kind of already dipped our toes into this part of the conversation in the last session, where you all started to shine a light on some creative solutions that you're involved in. And so we're going to dig into that a little bit more now and it's story time. Okay, for the afternoon. Hope you got your snacks. It's story time. We want to hear the stories. We want to hear the success stories. We want to find bright spots. There's a lot of incredible work going on, as we've already heard about, creative solutions that people are trying to work on in different places. And this is an opportunity for everyone to be sharing out. Love to hear from different geographies, and we've heard from the landowners, and now I know a lot of our partners are really working in this space, and so we've got a third set of questions up here. What sort of creative solutions have you found to be successful in meeting landowners' needs and creating win-wins for fish and wildlife? Also, what have you found to be the most successful models or programs out there, incentives that are out there? Where are the gaps? And that, where is no one working that needs focus? Or what are we missing when we talk about this stuff? So questions, and I would invite folks to start with one or freeform, but if you're more interested in one of the other ones too. And I think, Herb, I did not give you a heads up that I was going to do this, but I'm going to start with you on this question, if you don't mind. Interested in your perspective, creative solutions have you found to be successful when you're working with landowners and you're trying to create those win-wins for fish and wildlife?
Sure. Thank you. Well, I should have maybe brought this up at the last block, but I was thinking it ties in here too. It's like it's just getting information out to producers. I think that we try our best, but don't get as much information out as to speaking to like adaptive ways of working on things. And here's this kind of something that happened this summer with the wildfires. That they went through our country, Lone Rock Country, and for a lot of really large producers, they lost 100% of their grazing lands, and it was devastating. And this March we had our annual meeting, and we had talked about virtual fence. Was our presentation, and the folks were kind of interested in it. We had really great attendance. But this fire happened, and we got a phone call. We're already working on the normal stuff. Let's get some seed. So what can we do about erosion? All the things that come with fire recovery. But when that fire happened, it burned up about $9.5 million worth of fence. And in our office, we're wondering, what in the world are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? And then our phone rang, and it was one of our producers out there, and he said, let's try this virtual fence. I was like, okay. And then we couldn't, basically in 39 days, we were able to get funding for 10, mobile trailers for virtual fence towers out there. And, I don't think we would have gotten that phone call. Let me back a little bit. I don't think we would have got that phone call if we hadn't put that information out there about a certain type of technology that could, help folks with certain situations. So that happened, and then we were able to pull it off. We we got the technology out there. They were able to get their their cows on grass out on CRP fields that were opened up for emergency grazing that didn't have any fence, just because they've over time fallen down and things like that. So we were able to help these folks, and it was just kind of this disaster happened, but out of all of it, the combination of us working together, we now have this virtual fencing program that we're starting up, and it just is one of those things. We had the information in front of these folks at the right time, and we were able to pull off something and help these folks in a dire situation. And if you'll indulge me, I'd just like to read a thank you note that I was handed yesterday. It was best day of my work life was yesterday when I got this, and it was just a simple thank you card, and all it said was, "Thank you so much for going above and beyond to help us from day one. Knowing you were there for us was a comfort then and now." And that was just so. It was just wonderful. They're grateful. It was great to help people, our people. And I bring this up because I think it's all of this, and we can get as creative as we want on solutions, but it all comes down to trust. And you have to, when you're working on working lands, as soon as you set foot out there and you start talking with someone, you're negotiating a future transaction of some sort. And you're not going to work with someone you don't trust. And I think that, groups like SWCDs and councils, I know I'm talking a little bit more granular here, boots on the ground stuff, but that's what gets things done, is earning that trust. Another example, I guess, is, I mentioned the 30-mile watershed. There's 30 miles in Gillum County, and we're doing process-based restoration on 98% of that. That's 10 different private landowners that trust us to go put fake beaver dams on their creeks, and also they see the benefit in it and things like that. But when we're negotiating, say, hey, we want to fence off the stream, and we would like to do these BDAs on your property. And that sounds great, but I need a road down here to maintain that fence, because I don't want to have to ride a horse down there to fix the fence. And then so that's when we start working with them. We'll get you a road. It's a road that they need, but they can't afford to put in there. And it's that those negotiations just happen over and over again. When you get out on the property, I tell my staff, first question is, what are your objectives out here? I know you all know this, but what are your objectives? What do you want to see happening here in 1 year, in 5 years, 10 years? What do you want your children to inherit? And having those conversations is, what do they want first? I know it sounds like very obvious, but instead of going out there and being like, well, this is what this agency or this agency wants, it's all about trust, I guess. And that's what gets things done on the ground. And just trying to be creative in your negotiations, with how you can help the producer get what will help their operation, and also do some benefits for fish and wildlife at the same time. So thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you for sharing that note. You have those high points in your career. Sometimes they're little, but they're really special. And also what you just said about that example, 30 mile, and you're trying to do these beaver dam analogs, and they needed a road. And you were the one that said we need to make the problems and the solutions bigger. To me, that feels like that's on that track. What do they need? What do we need? Let's do it both. Mark Hudson, I see your hand.
Yeah, part of this might be a little bit of an echo of what Ed was saying earlier, but part of what I do is technical assistance for when there are agricultural and conservation groups who are trying to find joint strategies. And one of the first things that I tend to do when and we've done this in several regions, so I've gotten in the States, so I've gotten a pretty broad perspective. And one of the first things we do is that we will survey agriculture. And we'll go out to a bunch of landowners and we'll ask them questions, what are your biggest problems in your day-to-day life? And that ranges from kind of normal agricultural problems, price of input, labor, access to market, so on and so forth, as well as natural resource issues, wildfire, drought, wildlife regulations, so on and so forth. And in almost every case, the natural resource issues end up ranking below these everyday agricultural issues. And it's interesting, you go back to the producers themselves and say, hey, do you not care about these things? The answer is no, I absolutely do care about them. These are a lot of the reasons why I choose to live where I am and do what I do. But if I don't solve those higher priority things on this list, I won't be able to exist out on this landscape. And so while I see those problems, it's the passion, I'm oriented towards fixing them. I just don't have the time, ability, capacity kind of thing. And so in doing the technical assistance projects, one thing that we're starting to get traction on is going back to the conservation groups and saying, hey, if you really want to work with these producers on everything from salmon restoration to sage grouse, you may have to start talking about bringing in consultants to help these guys with direct-to-market strategies to diversify their sales base. You may need to bring in rural development organizations to work with them on creating local processing infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And at first I've gotten a lot of pushback, hey, Mark, that's not our problem. And the thing that I push right back on is say, yeah, but you're not their problem. If you want to be up the list of problems that these people tackle, you need to expand your conception of the problem, which is not just a natural resource issue, it is a community issue, right? That is oriented around a natural resource. And so really trying to frame and block things in those perspectives and looking at it as all of these, not just as natural resource issues, but as community issues, has really done a lot to start looking at kind of creative problem solving, forcing groups out of their normal box, particularly in these rural communities where there is a lack of capacity. So, some conservation groups in particular are viewed pretty speculatively, knowing that they range from like billion-dollar organizations to multi-million-dollar organizations, their budgets outstrip the local community government budgets, so on and so forth. Your mission may say that you only exist for one purpose, but again, you're not going to get to that purpose if you're not bringing the resources which are needed. And so I think that's the big kind of advocate push, and where we've started to get a little traction in community conversations. We'll see if it bears fruit, but that is one thing that we're really trying to advocate.
Thank you. And I do recognize I can be a little bit long. I've got my clock right here. So I'm going to try to do this really, really quick. I'm going to answer questions. I'm going to start with the obvious one. And I was just talking about this in the break, largest dam removal in the United States. That's controversial in and of itself. So I'm not going to chalk that up as a win right now, but I am going to talk up that the salmon going beyond the Iron Gate within weeks after that last breach, that's a win. I mean, I don't care how you shake it, I don't care who you are. That is a win. It's exciting. And for those of you that seen a salmon in the Klamath River in Oregon, it's pretty cool. It's been 100 years. And so I don't care who you are. It's really neat, and that's a win. Another win, and I think related, and knowing that the dam removal has been on our doorstep for years, I think there's been a psychological shift amongst our land, mine in particular. I'm not gonna lump everyone into that, but I have one landowner who's one of our larger landowners, and his family has been around a very, very long time. In fact, I think he's third generation, and he's a granddad. And so, but he told me, he said he's getting to the point he's starting to think legacy and things like that. And he said his family has destroyed more wetlands in the Klamath Basin than any other family. And he said, now it's time for me to start putting them back. And to me, I think that psychological shift is a win. I think it's, and the reason I think that is because there are things that are shifting in the climate basin right now on an environmental ecosystem front, and I think it's the folks that are stubborn and choose not to think outside the box and choose not to adapt. Those are the ones that are going to fail. And I think he's thinking about opportunities to create his grain ground into working lands. And I've spent a lot of time with a lot of the folks down in the Central Valley, the rice growers, and doing that fish food stuff. You guys have read or heard about that. It's pretty exciting. They're growing fish food out in these rice fields, and then they're draining that water off to the Sacramento River as the salmon are coming up. It's pretty spectacular. And so, I talked about how fortuitous my district is relative to its geographic location of the Klamath River. We're starting to explore how we can treat our lands as working lands, but like the floodplains of the Sacramento. And so he's very interested in that meeting coming up on Monday, where I've got my landowners wanting to come to the working lands meeting. Like, how are we going to create a working land program in the district? To me, that's pretty cool. And I love ag. I mean, I love to eat. So it's like for ag or produce, turn around and start thinking about the ecosystem. I think is a win across the. One thing, next steps, I do want to cover this real quick. Next steps where we can work together, and I say we, KDD and ODW, we already are working together, but where we can work together, I'll say better, is those salmon are there. And I did talk about what we're proposing to do with our 80 count. You have $10 million from the Bureau of Reclamation for fish screens. We want to screen our turnouts on the 80 count. I want to do that tomorrow. So that's where we can work together. That'd be fantastic. All right, I will leave it at that. Thank you all.
Wilda, and then Fred, I see your hand, so I will go to you next.
I want to talk about power lines. So we have on our property, this is small stuff. On our property, had this big power line that runs through it, and we bought the property 12 years ago, and the power line was totally covered with Scotch broom. It was like a desert. Okay? So we worked with BPA, the BPA power line, and we cleared off all the Scotch broom, and we're trying to bring it back to native, near top bird habitat. So we protected all individual shrubs that were sitting there and put some more in. My husband, do a BPA that we would maintain the, they would, because usually they come back, they come through a spray every 5 years. We just slot spray every year for Scotch broom, maintain those plants. Now the whole stretch of it, which is pretty big, is totally covered with, hazel and small plants. We plant native grass seed. It's a haven for birds. We have all kinds of birds. We have stocks of. Well, BPA has 15,000 miles of power line, in the west states. And if attention were paid to those lines, that's a lot of habitat. Millions of acres. And we've raised about power lines of all kinds of folks, and everyone says, "Oh, yeah, power lines," and then we got anything about it that I know of. So I think a potential for us, for our little forest, a big win. We have all these birds out there, we see the jays and the red-tailed pigeons and all those wonderful species right there, our forest. But that could be expanded everywhere. That would be a potential win. So, and it has any influence of power lines.
Just to follow on to that, and you clearly appreciate the fish and wildlife that returned after that work. What was it for you? Why that on?
That goes back to that question about hosting. What's the host on your land? We don't host species on our land. We share that land with those species. So I guess it's a moral imperative.
Thank you. Okay, Fred, I'm going to turn it to you.
Well, thank you.
Patrons.
I just want to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities to fill some gaps. Um, the incentives, there needs to be an incentive program that fits into the business plan of the landowner that's ongoing. And I would suggest that people take a serious look at David Brock Smith's bill that he's introducing with regard to the salmon credit. That has some real possibilities. Kind of a thread I've noticed through this whole conversation is how do you incentivize the landowners? And if there's something that fits into their business plan and gives them whether they're growing grass to graze cattle or crops or providing habitat, if it all helps make that operation work, then that's a success story, and it allows for a win-win for all the stakeholders. The second point would be that we need to look at developing better programmatics and a streamlined system here where we're not sitting here for years dealing with a NEPA deal and that sort of thing. Other people are doing it. We need, as a landowner and whatever, we need time and certainty. And if we're strung out here for years trying to get this work done, we're not serving anybody. The third point I would make is that there's a huge education effort that needs to go on here. The general public doesn't have a clue of what's going on the ground out here. And without the support of the public, it's going to be hard to justify the good work that's being done. And so that is kind of the stepchild of the whole process is that we aren't doing a real good job of telling this story either. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. And Kaylee, I'm glad your name 10 is up. So I was going to reach out to you and ask for your thoughts on these questions as well.
Fred and I are working together, so I go after him. I just kind of to use my little space of time to kind of echo what some themes that I've heard people saying that I also kind of came to share that same message, and I think that multiple people sharing that same message, that's probably something important. So on the ground conservation practitioner, work for Stillwater Conservation District and I've been for 10 years. And I'm lucky to be able to do conservation in the community that I'm actually from, where I was born and raised. So I know a lot of landowners going back. A lot of times I connect with them by telling them, oh, my grandma drove you on the school bus. My mom. Right? So that's been really helpful for me. My most successful projects, I said this earlier, have been the ones that contain some element of something that is useful to the landowner, such as a stream crossing, a tide gate, a culvert, an access road, something that benefits the production operation at the bottom of the landowner. And then oftentimes we are tying in some ecological uplift practices, I'll say. It's kind of a package deal. So the landowners generally, not saying all, because there are some landowners who are very, very enthusiastic in conservation, and we call those the low fruits. And most of those, as Fred mentioned earlier, have been picked by now. And so it's much harder to do types of conservation such as riparian fencing and planting, which are extremely important and cost-effective methods of improving water quality. And I really am hoping that the state can come up with some kind of way to better incentivize those projects. Every state, local, federal, regional recovery plan for salmon has found that the two, at least in our area, the two primary
limiting factors for recovery are loss of marine habitats, which we are doing a lot of work with tide gates and what we call working landscape on the south coast are usually tide gate replacement projects and wetland restoration on ag lands. I don't like speaking in public. But the secondary limiting factor is usually water quality. Our district and our water partners have been doing water quality monitoring in Coos for a few years now, Coos County. And generally what we're finding is that summer stream temps are fairly inhospitable in most, especially in the main Stem River, but also in many of the important tributary streams. And with climate change, I only really expect it to get worse. Flows are getting low in the summer and temps are getting warm. And fish are struggling to find these little thermal refuges. And tide gate replacement is very expensive and requires engineering and lots of permitting. But riparian fencing and planting is possibly your biggest bang for the buck. You're just planting trees and building fences. But landowners oftentimes don't have the land to give up to spare in those large riparian buffers. So I just think if we can find better ways to incentivize those practices, we can make those project types popular as well.
Thanks so much. Really great points, Kaylee. Appreciate that. Okay, we'll come back this way, Nathan, and then Peter.
You said it was great. Good job. That's the first one, creative solutions. I think there's a lot, engaged landowners typically are engaged in participating in these programs. So I think how do we get to those that aren't engaged, and no different than helping me out. It's on the ground. It's folks like Kaylee that are out there. We need more of them to help. Landowners are busy with their operations and getting some of this over the hump. Starts with boots on the ground, gaining trust, as we've heard, relating to them, and then also helping landowners convince the producer to convince the landowner that it's worthwhile to take land out of production, for instance, and then help them match those programs with dollars. And then they need to be hungry. They need to be hungry to get the job done and not just stay in the office. And they need to get out. There's money there. NRCS has, I forget, $21 billion with the IRA. I don't know what to do with it. A good example of kind of win-win, and a good example of how this worked. We were approached by the Walla Walla Basin Watershed Council, the North Fork of the Walla Walla River, private land, and there's a private road accessing up there, and it hasn't been very well maintained from a river health standpoint. And folks from the Basin Watershed Council worked to talk to us, and a lot of us were too busy to kind of get engaged on it. But we just trusted, like, hey, these guys are, they talked us through it, and they're in their second or third year on the river restoration project there. And I know some of the folks in this room have helped fund some of that, so thank you for that. This fall, project got the Oregon State Land Board Stream Award, which was pretty neat. But so kind of a nice thing is hands off the growers. I mean, we're giving them go for it. Some of the growers started all their eyes about all the culverts they're putting in and different things that, they're not fast. They're just going to get washed out. But jobs being done. On the voluntary programs, CREP is a very important one. That's where we do the stream buffer, riparian zones. Washington State has gone through a big lawsuit where all the projects have gotten reviewed with a microscope, and a lot of them are coming out of CREP, or at least the funding stopping, which is very troubling. And the programs need to be flexible. A good example in our area, NRCS years ago came out, and we could use it in a production rainfall zone where we have high bushel yield without burning or baling our straw off. And those programs weren't flexible area. Lastly, the gaps. For me, we do a lot of stream work and things like that. The elk, Mark's gonna laugh here. The elk continue to be a problem. We have a herd of 100, 300 roaming around half mile from public road, just trying to couple away. This is within 2 miles, 3 miles of, I don't know, pre-water, on farm fields, 5 miles away from the forest or the mountain area. Last winter we had a big herd that kind of together and kind of guessing how many were out there, and I was like, oh, 300 or 400. And I took a drone out, a couple pictures of, we counted 185 in one field, half CRP, the other half were in freshly planted wheat that was covered in snow, but about that tall. And, you know, it's hard to calculate the impact, but the frustrating thing is we are hosting the work, we're hosting a public, you know, animal, and go to hunt, but sometimes it gets tiring to host long, and then, you know, not getting it, you know, so it's, I've sent you the picture, but it's pretty amazing. So, and it's frustrating too, because no one knows, the agencies don't know where these elk are. It's like, you know, out and about. So, thank you. Oregon State Land Board Stream Board was the Walla Basin Watershed Council.
So I wanted to build on a theme that both Kelly and David touched on. In specific, GAP, I think city and rural communities. So in which you pass kind of the low-hanging fruit, folks that are motivated and have the resources to be able to do positive work, sort of how to get to that next year. And I think about one of the biggest gaps there is kind of the pre-development capital, sort of the $30,000 to $75,000 that a community might need or a landowner might need to do GIS or water quality surveys or whatever the sort of suite of assets they need to collect to get ready and be ready when our $121 million becomes available. Staging people up to be able to access resources when they come available and doing that at scale, I think that's a huge gap.
Go ahead, Kristen, then Bruce.
Just thinking about all the people in the room that have been involved in really effective creative solutions that work on the ground. There's endless examples around Oregon of how we can do this well, which gives you this great sense of optimism. But the only time I've done this work for about 30 years, which isn't so long, but it's also long enough to move when the infrastructure package came out. That is the first time that I've seen the ability to address these issues at a truly landscape scale. And they are landscape scale problems that take that level of resources to get it over the finish line. So what's the limiting factor, the gap across the board? It's consistent funding at the kind of scale that it takes to make it possible for private landowners to do this work. It's possible to have the capacity to innovate and bring support and resources to the table. So what's the to having the funding that we need? Well, it's the understanding and buy-in that gets outside of the people that are living this every single day. Commissioner King was raising this, I think, really astutely during the break. There is a huge part of our state and decision makers in our state that don't see these natural resource issues as the sort of existential threat probably all of us sitting in this room do. And so I guess I would say the big gap is really figuring out how to communicate this, the scale that it takes to get the buy-in, bring the resources that we need in a continuous year in and year out basis. And so I don't think figuring out how to solve these problems is really our challenge. Our challenge is being able to implement the solutions that we come up with. So.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Bruce. Go ahead.
That was the perfect setup for me. I was really struck earlier when John said, you know, he got his ranch back because society decided to invest in these kind of things. And what Kristen's talking about there is it's not a public policy priority. It's not a political priority. It's not a priority. Really, it's state of Oregon for funding. And granted, the federal government put a lot in place, not everything. The state is a much harder sell. And I'm sitting here and seeing Jeff Huntington from the governor's office and a first state legislator who set up the Ways and Means and Natural Resources Subcommittee and chaired it for many years. And I'd just be interested in their thoughts about how we address those challenges, making working lands conservation a higher priority. Get back to third tier, fifth tier.
Well, you have, can you hear me? It doesn't sound like this time. No, I'm not adverse to answering or addressing that question at all. I'm frankly a little pissed off about where we sit as a natural resource cohort in the state budget system. And it's hard to be so blunt. It's late in the day and late in the weekend. We're in special session on fire and a few other things. So, 8% of the general fund budget in Oregon is spread across 14 agencies and 34 boards that deal with natural resource issues. There are divisions in other state agencies, divisions of other state agencies that have higher budgets in multiples compared to the natural resource agencies of the state. I've been working for 39 years in Oregon natural resource policy. And one of the first things I did when I joined the administration was to look at what the percentage of natural resource agency budgets have been for the last 20 years. And they've never exceeded 3.4%. To about that in one-time funding in the last 2 biennia, because a lot of money that was put in one time, but not in current service level. And so we really have been at about an equal percentage of the state budget for a long time. And it has a corrosive effect, and it really makes it hard to knit together long-term landscape scale initiatives that hold over time and build across agency jurisdictions. The measure 66 ballot measure back in 1999 was really the first big significant investment that was built into the Constitution. This followed measure 76 and whatever it was 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that dedicate that make the funding that you use possible, right? And I think Oregon has that secret sauce in the Watershed Council WCD process. We haven't found great ways to knit together the ebb and flow of federal funds, and still struggle, I think, with across the board with investments in infrastructure because of exactly what Peter mentioned a minute ago, and that is there's a lot of money for some parts of projects, not a lot of money to settle in or up to be ready to do that, or even our small municipalities when we're water infrastructure and things like that. I think then, and Debbie and I get along on this point quite well, growing it bigger is and looking at it as a landscape scale make the difference. I also think that working across constituencies to cultivate electeds in our legislature that understand the natural resource issues and make that a priority for their time in legislature is an important thing to do. And that takes a lot of time, and it doesn't start when session starts in February. It starts preparation for the 2027 session now, so that we have advocates that understand stories. And some of your organizations do tours, and they're fabulous, and to watch agricultural interests and forestry interests take legislators out to different parts of the state. Becky's really good about that. That kind of understanding, given the preeminent, really big issues that are social issues, housing, mental health, behavioral health, education, that's the landscape that we're playing when you get into a political system in the legislature. And so absent that advocacy in the building that understands the opportunity cost is destined for 2.8% to continue. Chris?
Yeah. So,
from my perspective, there's a tremendous opportunity to work together to increase investment in collaborative voluntary work. And it's been, the natural resource budgets have been 2.8% for a long time. And I think it was the 2000, I can't remember if it was the 2005 session, maybe they were a little higher. I remember one of the things when I co-chaired the Natural Resources Subcommittee of Ways and Means, and I co-chaired that with Bob Jensen for one session. They were in the 2011 session, who was a Republican from Pendleton, and the co-chairs said, "Okay, well, here's us the plan for how you're going to spend the general fund." We came back to them and we gave them a plan to double our general fund. They said, no, you guys didn't get the memo. We want a plan for what you're going to do with your existing general fund. And so we came back to them again at the next meeting, saying, well, you know, we used to be at 5% of the general fund and now we're at 2% of the general fund or whatever it was at the time. Said, no, like we have other priorities. You need to bring us a plan. So we finally cooperated last week. But we continue to advocate for more stuff in the Christmas tree bill at the end of the session. But so my point is it is so difficult to get general fund prioritized on that sorts of issues. You're going to be much more if you're together. If you've got environmental NGOs and trade associations like mine, or folks representing, ranchers, beef growers, cattlemen, whoever, going into this hand in hand, because advocating for general fund to be spent on voluntary collaborative work has got a much better chance than if environmental NGOs are asking for more money for more regulatory oriented work that is, frankly going to make the lives and operations of growers more difficult. And so, sign me up all day to go with you all to advocate for the type of projects that we're talking about. But, not all agencies operate like this agency, and I don't need to tell you which agencies tend to be a little bit heavier handed, but we are not going to join you in advocating for that prioritization of general fund to, add more staff that makes life difficult. And every led session, these are where the rubber meets the road is, what's the general fund to be spent on, with stakeholders are in support, which are in opposition, who has a stronger lobby, who's owed something through this political process. I mean, it's just a horse trading that, the budget process comes down to at the end of the legislative session. Not saying it's totally divorced of, policy priorities, but there's horse trading involved as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation, and I'm hopeful that it can lead to more collaborative efforts future. And the final thing I will say is that natural resource sectors like ours it's not necessarily in our DNA to go to Salem and ask Salem to spend money on things that are important to us. Folks tend to be a little bit more like, hey, don't bother you don't bother us. Just let's do what we do. But a lot of folks aren't comfortable asking the legislature to spend general fund, and they get even more uncomfortable if they think that it will lead to some legislators thinking, well, if they're asking for general fund, they need to be paying more. And there's legislators that constantly session after session, are looking to raise taxes on landowners, particularly to companies. It's a thing. And so we're fairly reticent to go to the legislature and ask the legislature to spend money on projects that, you know, might be really good for habitats, good for species, because sat in those rooms before, and I know that there will be voices saying, well, if we're spending money over there and they're supportive of it, and maybe we ought to be taxing them a bit more, and, which is kind of a perverse way of looking at it, but it happens. So
I do have one more opportunity for me, and I'll make sense. We're on
Quickly, and Chris has to get to a practice.
I have been observing that I think we have reached a pivot point of some that I haven't seen before, and that is a willingness to look at basin or local basin by basin solutions and think about what our water needs are in Harney County, different than what our water needs are in Morrow County or other places. And as of agencies, I think if you can bring a coalition toward a way to manage the resource challenges or working landscapes in your basin, in your area, and frame that in the context of working with the budgets and the discretion that an agency director like Debbie has, there's an opportunity to build a coalition in the legislature, I think, that is very open to that. And we are really working hard, moving our cabinet in that direction to think about our resource issues more as a basic kind of a resiliency issue as opposed to a state program.
Thank you, Jeff, Chris, thank you all. The time has flown by and we are now at the point of summarizing and wrapping up. So I'm going to invite our commissioners to share a reflection or two that each of them has had from the day. I would like to invite all of us first to take 60 seconds to write down in your notes an insight that you're walking away with, or a next step that you personally are going to do, someone you're going to get coffee with, something that stuck out to you that you heard someone else say, questions around things we haven't resolved. Just 60 seconds to write down what you'll take away, your own notes. You'll see that we've taken, I don't know how much notes Joy has that we will be sharing back with you all to add to and make sure we didn't miss anything. We'll be integrating the visual notes that I took up here. You're welcome to have a look, see, and add a post or two before you leave, but we want to get you home on time. We've wanted to end at 5. So I'll just ask our commissioners to make sure a couple fodder here or there, maybe starting with Commissioner King, since you're here and have been very quiet. I don't know if you kick us off.
Thank you all. It really was great meeting all of you, seeing some of you again, meeting the people. As I stated, very happy to be here. The importance of being humble and staying curious, because I have learned a lot today. I think I will continue. I'm still kind of thinking about more things, but one of the things, and Sarah mentioned in her opening, I've talked with Sean about this, I've talked with a number of people about this, about urban issues, which I always bring up. Obviously, I live in Portland. I also, Portland's not the only city in Oregon, by the way. And it is impossible to get around how you do something landscape without including cities. Fish and wildlife don't make differentiation, and I don't think we should either. And one of the things that is my biggest takeaway from this is we don't see each other. And I am the opposite of Commissioner Hatfield. Like, for example, city slickers go out to the desert and they stop the brothers and they look at the sage see there's nothing out here. When the country mice come to the city and they look at what they think of the concrete jungle and say there's no habitat here. We have to start seeing each other. And that's why I said, like, we need urban voices in contexts like this, because it's really easy to demonize a forester if you've never met one. Okay? It's really easy to cheer the shutting of a mill if you don't realize how that impacts forest control. And for all of us in Portland that were choked with smoke during the Labor Day fires, just use that as a little reminder of why we need mills and how this is all connected landscape level. Okay, and your idea about the fire, not the fire, sorry, the power lines, because they cause fires. That's what that was in my head. The power lines in Portland throughout the whole state, pollinator corridors. That's specifically what we use them for throughout the city. And it's astonishing to me that a city that has 2 times the amount of endangered species in it, that every city in the entire, every salmon, the entire Willamette Basin, whether you see them or not, they go by, salmon or mold, to think that there's no habitat there, or there's no working land there. We've kind of got to start to shift that narrative and that thinking and start seeing each other in news like this, where we can talk and learn and connect on some of these solutions like what you're talking about. I get a big budget. You get people to understand you. You get people to storytell. You get people to communicate. And that's kind of why I always bring it up, is because I say to people, I double dog dare you to go to Portland and tell them they don't have working lands when have removed downspouts that stopped billions of untreated stormwater from going into the Willamette that essentially do those salmon that are dying. So I think we just need to start to see each other. That's kind of my big takeaway, because I've learned so much from all of you that I can take to them, but they don't see it. Trust me, they don't. I sit in meetings with them and they have no idea what happens in a place like this. And I think we need to do more of that. And I know we talked about it. I know it's in 2025 and beyond, but I kind of want to continue that. I want to continue things like this moving forward. Because I've talked to Ellie about like coming to cities and talking about, I've talked to some of the level staffers, like we've got new people that are on job rotation. Like, we've got to start connecting more and seeing how we all connect. And we're in this together. We got in this together. The only way we're going to help this together. So that's kind of my thinking about today. And thank you. I really have enjoyed this day.
My turn. I would absolutely echo the thank you. It's been a remarkable day. Not that I would take these notes, and I've done my usual self in terms of takeaways and notes from this meeting, but I want to boil it down to 3 if I can. First one is, I think you said, Sarah, what's the next step in people's minds? And if I could do a next step immediately, I would have the same kind of group or this group talk about Kristen's question of how do you take it to the next level, do this, the landscape level. And we actually had a bunch of people starting to talk about that, on how you really do take it to the landscape level. And clearly money is a big piece of that, but there's so many ideas in this room. The other one is, and I think that the director talked about the power of stories. Scott had a bunch of them that I wrote down. But one that you talked about, like the picture on the wall in front of my desk now, is from the day that staff sent out notice, and it went on OPB and other things, that the salmon are back. And that's the picture that we could, say people all over the state love that picture. And so I think that those stories are just remarkable, and that's worth a ton. The biggest takeaway I have in terms of I wish the people across the state could hear this is that thing about no matter how long I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I've never heard ranchers say anything in answer to the question of what makes you do this or what's your incentive other than it's the right thing to do. That's how they answer. And people need to hear that, but they absolutely have to compare it with society has to invest. Society wants what ag can give you. Society wants what timber can give you. And society needs to invest, but it needs to be on recognizing that people will do it because it's the right thing to do. I think somebody said, I had a group line that say you can't pay for conservation from operating. You just can't do it. Most ag things. So anyway, that's my conclusion. Thank you so much. This has just been a great day for tons of takeaways.
Thanks. The same thing for me. We'll appreciate all the input. I guess the one takeaway here is for me the biggest one is it seems like last time the commission level, especially back last year or so, we're kind of referees rather than helping accomplish for the win-win solutions. And I think that's the most important thing I took away today was do whatever we can at the commission level to get to these win-win solutions where everybody can walk with. Maybe everybody's not happy. Everybody feels like they can away with something rather than it seems like we've been someone has to, like we heard today, someone has because the other side has to win. And, I think that'd be important for us to try and get to the next level where everybody can go away feeling like you got something. Here.
Okay, thank you. Mine are more deliverables. First, I'll just say, foresters and wildlife biologists can be introverts. All we want to be is out in the field, working in the woods, and a biologist, all they want to be is out counting deer and elk. And so it's tough to get us to, be charging. And so I think I can relate to that. So being a forester for 35 years. And so we need to be more proactive as natural resource agencies folks. So takeaways for me are what I heard was we need to do a better job of getting info out to our producers, to the people on the ground that are providing all the habitat and food for these fish and wildlife. And we've got some work to do there. It's all about trust in the agencies and building trust. And Harney Collaborative is a classic example of people that didn't get along for a while, and then there was some funding provided to the collaborative, and now they're very productive in doing good things. It's something to hold up. So we need to do whatever we can as federal or state agencies to build trust with our property owners and landowners out there so that they trust that we're there to help them achieve their objectives and not be in potential conflict with what they would like to do on their lands. Expedited process, I heard that a number of times today. We need to constantly look at our processes of how we can expedite processes, but do it in a way that can pass edits or people that evaluate the work to make sure it's done appropriately. So there's a way to do that. More education to bring the public along. There's a lot of incentive programs out there that I don't think the public knows about. Owen's got a whole bunch of programs that provide significant funding. The Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program, R&D, Restoration Enhancement, Access and Habitat, Oregon Conservation and Information Fund, and NRCS. NRCS has really stepped up to the plate in the last few years with some significant funding to get things done on the ground. I'm not getting them all.
folks, money talks for these, and so we need to make sure that we can, and a lot of them do it because they care. But like John O'Kee said, heck, when somebody provided some funding for my juniper control, it saved me. And so, there's opportunities for that. So we need to make sure that that happens. Get project shovel ready. We need to, I like the idea about, we need to provide some funding for property owners to get projects shovel ready. The project on the ground, and somebody says, well, yeah, we've got the money, but you got to do all this development for it. Well, if we have these projects ready to go, then when the money comes. So, and a lot of that, getting the to do that kind of stuff. And then, I've been on many tour out in the field, but, the PODOT, I think, does it pretty good. They have legislative tours where they invite the legislators to come out and see what the issues are with highways. Well, do we do that? I mean, we get legislators out on the ground, see what some of our fish and wildlife issues are, and get onto a person's property. Here's some projects that really work for sage grouse, so they go, that's really good. And it isn't just an economic development for that farmer or rancher, it's an economic development for the entire basin. And I really agree with Jeff's comments. I'm not trying to smoke on Jeff here, but I think the basin approach is a way to do that. Collaborative folks together in the basin with the basin and look for opportunities for these divergent groups to come together and say, we can really do some good things in these basins. So those collaborative efforts work to try to possibly take basin approach something we need to explore rather than trying to throw money here and here and look at some opportunities to do that. And last but not least, I said it's all about relationships. It's building relationships with our constituencies, the landowners. It's building relationships with the agencies. It's building relationships with our nonprofit groups, our various entities out there that want the same things that we want. We want that mission right up there: protect and enhance Oregon's fish and wildlife and their habitats, and for the youth to enjoy it as a future generations. There's not a person in this room that doesn't agree with that. How do we get there? And so I really appreciate the input today. It's helped me. I've got 2.5, 3 pages of notes here. So I think we've got some real opportunities to move some things forward there. So I really appreciate it. Thanks.
I can hop in really quickly. Yeah, echoing what everyone else said, I think the biggest thing that struck me during this conversation is the sense of community building that occurs, that has already happened, but that occurs also through these conversations with potentially unconventional partners. And also the idea that through these conversations, we're building empathy with one another, which I think Dr. King spoke to a little bit. I appreciate any chance to understand the perspectives of others and see where they're coming from. And I can't imagine this won't inform some of our thinking and at least our conversations as we move forward as a commission. Also, thank you everyone for being open and vulnerable. I feel like that's a really important part of the trust building exercise, to share what's really on your mind without having to filter yourself. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Clue. Appreciate that. And I will go to, I'm going to give you the last word. So I think we'll go to Commissioner Freeze.
Yeah, thank everyone. We'll try to keep this short, but I felt like I spent a lot of time recently thinking about scalability. And what I heard today is a lot of really good examples of where there has been success, but often that success has been tied to very specific aligning of stars, a lot of hard work, right time, right place. And at the same time, one small thing, one cog in the system can kind of halt that work. And so I think about this as a system and thinking about, I think that we need to continue working those, big, deep success projects, but then also how do we start getting maybe smaller wins statewide? I really believe that success begets success and that there can be a snowball effect, especially on a producer level. They do talk to one another, and I think that that is really where we're going to see momentum. I also think that failure begets failure. And so if there are too many roadblocks in our ability to adapt to climate change and all the natural resource issues that we're facing, there's going to be a lot of hands up in the air and saying, we've tried, we don't know what to do. And so I don't know how to crack that nut right now, but that's kind of how I'm thinking is how do we enhance big successes, small successes on a statewide level to start seeing more impact.
Oh, we have such a smart new commissioner. Okay, well, you guys, I'm just in love with all of you and this conversation. This has been pretty cool. Sarah, thank you for an unbelievable effort to bring this together, and everybody else at the department, this Debbie, Jeff, for coming and being here. I don't know about you all, but if you've been around Oregon for a long time, I felt like when I was younger, there was this powerful sense of Oregon together with its natural resources. Maybe this is just a time that was in my past that wasn't anybody else's. But I felt like there was this more connected thing, like 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Am I right, Jeff?
We had it together. Yes.
Okay, good. So I love what Commissioner King says, how do we connect the rural and the urban? How do we connect with one another? How do we be more vulnerable to crisis there? Because I think a lot of the farm and ranch families, probably forestry families as well, feel pretty scared too, right? And I think we could have had urban people in this conversation and it would have been powerful, but maybe people wouldn't have been as vulnerable either. Because we need to make those connections. When I think about people who are on working lands, I think we do what we can with what we have, and we always have. So I think about this barn we have on our ranch that is in the desert, and the rafters are like, it was probably built in the 1930s. The rafters have like aspen trees as rafters, pine trees as rafters, and they're all different sizes. And the nails in the barn, different nails. They're not all the same nails. They're like the nails that they had to build this barn. And so when I think about that tension between all of these people on working lands that actually need a lot of investment to help us all recover these lands and get them where they need to be, we are shy to ask for that. Like, hey, we really need help here because we're used to putting that barn up with what we have. So I don't know. I just feel like there's the people, if we could get over this hump, I can't even imagine the Oregon we could create. And I am so excited that Debbie and Jeff are here and thinking about these things. And I just feel like we should light some things on fire, make some stuff happen here. Right? Right on. All right. So thank you. Thank you guys so much.
Okay, we're over time and we could just going with this, I'm sure. But we all have the rest of our lives to get to today. So I think we will wrap it up. I will just say, first and foremost, thank you to each and every one of you for being with us and sticking through it. I'm just immensely grateful to everyone for that. We'll extend an invitation to you all to stay in touch. The commission is going to be talking about their roadmap of what they're going to be focused on for 2025 at their meeting tomorrow, their public meeting tomorrow. So tune into that conversation. I think it'll be a continuation in a lot of ways of scaling up, focusing at the landscape scale, continuing to focus on climate resiliency, bringing in more voices. So invite you to tune in for that. We will be processing and digesting and returning back to you a summary of notes from today's session. And if you can take with you that what Megan asked you to write down in those 60 seconds of what you're going to do next, hold on to that, take it with you, and maybe act upon it. And so I think with that, cheers to you all. Thank you, and get home safely.